Should we trust Biden with the keys to the economy for another 4 years? This video, which is unbiased, objective, and an expert analysis of Biden's past and future economic policies, will help you decide for yourself. This video isn't pro or anti-Biden. It's anti-political BS. And I already did one about Trump too, if you want to check that out. So let's dive into Biden's record and see if he deserves a passing grade. The areas I'll grade him on are jobs, each of his 4 big fiscal spending packages, and his plans for a second term. It makes sense to start with the most important driver of the economy, jobs. Here's what Biden says he did.
By the way, so far, we've created 14 million new jobs, more jobs in 3 years than any president's created in 4 years.
Wow, the greatest job creator of all time? No, not exactly. From February to April 2020, 22 million people lost their jobs. By the time he took office, 12 million of those jobs had already come back, and it took a year and a half for them to recover back to where they were at their peak. Really, he's created 5 million new jobs in 3 years, and essentially just got us back to the same trajectory we were on before 2020. The unemployment rate was actually lower in February 2022 under Trump than it is now. Now, don't get me wrong, we have a very healthy job market, but the recovery was due to the world opening back up, not Biden's policies. It would have happened no matter who was president. This is the kind of political BS I'm gonna help you see through. As far as I can tell, none of Biden's policies have had a significant impact on the jobs market. Where they did have a bigger impact was inflation. You can see here that the inflation adjusted earnings for the median, essentially the middle class worker, are still lower than they were when he took office. So despite his constant claim to be the greatest job creator ever, we have an unemployment rate that's slightly higher and pay that's slightly lower than they were in 2020. Biden gets a C- on jobs. Next, we'll evaluate his fiscal spending by looking at 4 big spending bills: the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan, the $1.2 trillion Infrastructure and Jobs Act, the $250 billion CHIPS Act, and the Unlimited Money Inflation Reduction Act. Biden's first big spending plan was the American Rescue Plan Act, a $1.9 trillion stimulus plan that he put in place shortly after taking office in March 2021. As soon as he put it in place, inflation started skyrocketing. You can see a clear inflection point between the US and Europe right after Biden's plan took effect. The worst part is that Biden was completely oblivious to this. In July of 2021, he said,
We will, in fact, reduce inflation.
Really? Massive stimulus worth like 9% of GDP? So throwing an extra 3 years of economic growth into the economy at once is gonna reduce inflation? Then, just a few months later, when he was called out on it,
you had told us at a town hall, I think it was in July.
Okay, hold on, time out. What is he holding? Is he holding on to like imaginary railings so that he doesn't fall over? I'm not sure I have an answer, but let's get back to economics here. Continue.
This was just near-term inflation. The Wall Street Journal recently talked to like 67 financial experts who said that they saw high inflation going all the way or deep into 2022. Do you think it's going to last for a while?
I don't think so. If we don't make these investments, yes.
What? So 67 financial experts say inflation is gonna go up a lot, but Biden says it'll go down unless we make these investments, AKA spend even more. Exactly what causes inflation. So what were the investments he made in the American Rescue Plan? It started with over $400 billion for a third round of blind stimulus payments that even Biden's own economic advisors said was not necessary. This was in addition to $200 billion to top up unemployment insurance. Giving unemployed people some extra help is one thing. Giving checks to people making 100 grand a year for no reason is just plain reckless. And of course, it was gonna be inflationary. Then over $650 billion went to the states to help them with the economic and health toll of the lockdowns. There was just one problem. They didn't need it. State and local governments were already well on their way to recovery by the time they got the money. And a lot of them ended up with their largest budget surpluses of all time. So were these good investments? Let's see. Alabama used the money to build 2 new prisons. Iowa spent $11 million renovating the Field of Dreams baseball diamond from the movie. Massachusetts built new football fields. And many states cut taxes and funded social programs that had nothing to do with the point of the bill. If I could sum it all up, you know what most of the money was spent on? Votes. If you give a politician a blank check, they're not gonna spend it on building a road or a bridge that won't be completed for 5 years. They're gonna spend it on something that wins them votes. These were not sound investments. He gave significant amounts of money to the states that didn't need it. He called it the American Rescue Plan, but states have until 2026 to spend their funds. How do you square that? Was the economy still going to need to be rescued 5 years later? Or did he just way overspend on things that did not help rescue the economy in 2021, were not sound investments, and were extremely inflationary and did vastly increase our country's debt problems? Some of the money went to good causes, but the plan could have easily been 1/4 of the size and been just as effective without spiking inflation. Some of this extra spending fed through to the strong economy, and the stimulus checks at least went to some of the people who then later got burdened by the inflation they caused. So there were some offsetting effects, but ultimately, I don't think this was a very good deal for the American people or the US economy. Biden's American Rescue Plan gets a D. Next, we'll grade the economic impact of Biden's $1.2 trillion Infrastructure and Jobs Act. This one was much better. First of all, only $550 billion was new federal spending, and it will be allocated over 5 years. Second of all, it went to things that actually help our economy. It will improve roads, upgrade the power grid, pay for airport repairs, expand internet access, remove lead and chemicals from our drinking water, build high-speed rail links, and so forth and so on. A lot of the programs have a green tint on them, but even if you put a woke spin on these policies and you say you want to advance environmental justice, ultimately, that just means reducing pollution, and no one likes pollution. Since more than half of the money was redirected from other federal spending, and pretty much all the spending will help improve our economy, the Infrastructure and Jobs Act gets an A from me. The next policy we'll evaluate is Biden's $250 billion CHIPS Act.
Let me start off with 2 words: made in America.
How many words? Well, math is hard when you're old enough to have taught Yoda in elementary school. The Made in America part is one of the 2 key problems with Biden's CHIPS Act. $52 billion is dedicated to subsidizing the manufacturing of semiconductors in the United States. The founder of TSMC, the most advanced semiconductor manufacturer in the world, which is benefiting from these subsidies for the plants they're building in Arizona, called it, quote, a wasteful, expensive exercise in futility. You know why? Because TSMC won't even be producing their most advanced chips at that plant in the US. Every chip made there will be far more expensive than the same chip made in Taiwan. And we don't even have enough people with the right skill sets in the US to even staff the plant when it's finished. If the rationale is national security, that doesn't make sense because they're not even gonna make the most advanced chips there. Even in the best case long run scenario, we were only projected to meet 1/5 of our demand for leading edge semiconductors in the US. And that ship has already sailed because of all the production delays. If the rationale is to bring back US manufacturing jobs, consider this: Made in America and bringing manufacturing jobs home are positive sounding slogans to American voters. But there's just one problem. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, and protectionism has been proven for generations to do more harm than good because of all the unintended consequences it comes with. Globalization and open competition have been key factors underpinning the long-term growth of the US. The semiconductor industry is a perfect example. The US used to dominate global semiconductor manufacturing, but lost about 3/4 of its market share over the last 30 years. However, you can see from the blue line that its market share of the total semiconductor industry has actually grown since then, as US companies like Nvidia and Broadcom have captured some of the higher value parts of the supply chain, like chip design. Intel lost its edge in manufacturing to companies like Taiwan Semiconductor and Samsung. But that's okay. We've lost some manufacturing jobs, but gained even more higher paying jobs in the same industry. The ability to use the most advanced chips made by a company in Taiwan with the most advanced equipment made by a company in the Netherlands that uses the most advanced lenses made by a company in Germany has allowed all kinds of American tech companies like Apple to thrive. iPhones are also not assembled in the United States, by the way, but there's a reason that Apple is the most valuable company in the world, not Foxconn, who put the phones together. Manufacturing isn't everything. By value, over 80% of the global technology sector is captured by US companies. But Biden wants to spend billions of dollars of taxpayer money to win back the lower value part of the supply chain. That just doesn't make economic sense. And then there are the long-term risks. Biden's semiconductor restrictions on China basically stopped them from producing leading edge chips. So they focused on cornering the market for trailing edge chips. Well, those are just as important for the functioning of the economy. They're used in everything from cars to TVs to washing machines. Almost everything we use every day needs them. Unfortunately, Biden's CHIPS Act incentivizes the US to produce less of them here, while his restrictions on China incentivize them to ramp up their production over there. That means that in order to solve one problem, Biden created another. And unfortunately, he didn't even solve the first problem. Now, we're at a bigger risk of becoming reliant on China for trailing edge chips down the road. The second problem with Biden's CHIPS Act is that it's full of policies designed to promote left-wing social goals that don't make economic sense. Surprise, surprise. It requires the Department of Commerce to create 20 new regional technology hubs. This is basically the same insane idea Trump is proposing if he gets elected again. Why would we build entirely new cities or waste money on building out a bunch of infrastructure in a random place when it already exists somewhere else? That's like saying, I'd really like to buy a new car. They have the one I'm looking for at the dealership 2 miles from my house, but I think I'll buy a plane ticket across the country and buy it there instead. It allocates a bunch of money to STEM education programs in rural communities, where you can spend the most money to serve the fewest students. Smart. By the way, I hear the public education systems in our inner cities are great and don't need any help at all. It sends a bunch of money for research on mining strategies for critical minerals. There's just one problem with that. His own environmental regulations would never allow us to ramp up mining of critical minerals in the United States. It also places discriminatory policies on a lot of its funding programs, which, in my opinion, can only lead to suboptimal results. Funding should go to the people and businesses who need it most and can do the most with it. If it doesn't, and that causes us to miss out on some major technological breakthrough, we could all be worse off for it. Now, this is an investing channel, not a science channel, so I'm not enough of a science expert to evaluate the merits of his vast array of scientific projects that will be funded. I certainly hope we have some breakthroughs and the money doesn't all go to waste, but I have no insight into that. What I do know is that the CHIPS Act is deeply flawed. It does not make us self-reliant for semiconductor production. In fact, it makes us more reliant on China in some areas. Its aim of bringing manufacturing jobs home is misguided because it will cost billions of dollars of taxpayer money to focus on the lower value part of the supply chain when we already dominate the higher value parts. It allocates research funding based on genetics instead of merits, and all the extra bureaucratic red tape will end up costing both taxpayers and consumers. This is another example of Biden's wasteful spending, and while some areas of it might score a few points, overall, the CHIPS Act gets an F. Biden's last fiscal policy will grade is his Unlimited Money Inflation Reduction Act, which should be called the Inflation Enhancement Act. Don't be fooled. It never had anything to do with reducing inflation. Biden even admitted that a few months ago. The Inflation Reduction Act was just his Build Back Better climate bill that he rebranded after his other spending bills caused inflation to skyrocket. The name was simply a ploy to trick the American people into supporting even more spending. Even the US government's own Congressional Budget Office said it would have a negligible effect on inflation in 2022, and it might even increase inflation in 2023. It's a spending bill, and its main inflation reduction components won't even kick in until 2026, so obviously it was not designed to help inflation in 2022. Originally, they estimated that it would cost $391 billion over 9 years. But in 2024, they updated that number to more than $800 billion. Wait, Kyle, how could that happen? Well, let me tell you why. Because many of the provisions in the bill were unlimited. There are incentives to make wind turbines and other green technology in the US, incentives for people to buy electric cars, and these credits can be taken up by however many people and businesses want them. Now, Biden would tell you that the more widely used these are, the more it helps the environment. So it's money well spent. But is it? Let's take the $7,500 electric vehicle tax credit, for example, which is now estimated to cost the government several times more than the initial projection. It only applies to cars that are mostly assembled and sourced in the US to try to bring back US manufacturing. However, there's a loophole where you can still get pretty much the whole credit on the car no matter where it's made, as long as you lease it instead of buy it. So they designed the policy thinking it'll cost a lot of money, but it'll be offset by the revenue from more jobs being created in the US. But instead, it'll cost them way more than projected and bring no jobs back to the US. Nice work, Biden. Even without the loopholes, these protectionist policies rarely work out the way politicians think they will. Here's how the protectionist policies like the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, work out in practice. The US throws a ton of money at companies to bring production here. So Europe and other allies have to spend a ton of money to bring production there. And then all the same stuff gets produced. But the people pay for it in the form of higher taxes and more expensive products. The IRA also pissed off our allies and went against everything that has made our economy the global leader, just like Trump's tariffs. This was from 2010, when we accused China of illegally stimulating and protecting its producers of green technology. And this is from Biden's Inflation Reduction Act in 2022, which is aimed at stimulating and protecting its producers of green technology. The IRA was based on a lie, which Biden has now admitted that it was designed to reduce inflation. It's now projected to cost more than twice as much as the initial projection. It has loopholes that will reduce its revenue generating and job creating capabilities, and it has protectionist measures that will reduce its impact on climate change and harm relations with our allies. It may well do some good for the environment, and it may well create some jobs, but it also could have done more while costing less. And the economic impact is now projected to be much worse than initially expected. Since that's all I'm grading here, the IRA gets a D. Overall, Biden's fiscal policy was a colossal failure. He started with almost $2 trillion of stimulus that was mostly wasted and was the primary reason inflation, interest rates, and the national debt all spiked in the US. Then he lied about it.
We actually cut the federal debt, the deficit, by $1.7 trillion.
No, he didn't. He raised it by more than $4 trillion. $6 trillion if you count 2023. Outside of war and recession, we have pretty much never had a fiscal deficit of over 5% of GDP until Biden did it every year. Regardless of whether you think any of his spending was for good causes, this is not sustainable. His protectionism also makes his policies less likely to achieve his goals. He wants to curb China's rise, but protectionism just pushes our allies away and proves China's point that democracies only care about the rules when they're not the ones breaking them. His green subsidies that require things to be made in the US would just make them more expensive and cause fewer people to use them. So do you want to help the environment or not? His frivolous spending is the reason that mortgage rates reached their highest level in over 20 years. That prices people out of the chief device for creating wealth, since 90% of millionaires are made through real estate. Rising rates make the debt more expensive, and it's US taxpayers who will be stuck with the bill. It's a travesty that so many young people don't understand how big of a risk this is to their future. With that, let's take a look at what could be in store if Biden gets another 4 years.
Do you think you play through the political liability?
That's a great asset. More inflation. What a stupid son of a bitch.
Well, obviously, Biden doesn't want to create inflation, but the reality is he did. So is that what we can expect more of if he's reelected? I want to be surprised, but it's hard to say. I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist here, but I have a hard time believing Biden will be the one making the decisions if he's reelected. In the February 2024 Department of Justice report about his storage of classified documents, they said that his memory was significantly limited and that it would be difficult to convince a jury to convict him of a crime that requires a mental state of willfulness. So with that caveat, 4 things I think are likely in a second Biden term are more anti-business policies, more left-leaning social and environmental spending, higher taxes, and a worsening budget deficit. Anti-business policies picked up when Biden appointed Lina Khan as chair of the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission. The FTC is supposed to be run by 5 commissioners, and only 3 can be from one political party. So who's there now? 3 Democrats and 2 vacancies. Lina is a hardline progressive that basically railroaded the 2 Republicans out of their positions, and then Biden just decided not to appoint anyone to replace them.
I'm prepared to work with my Republican colleagues.
I guess that doesn't apply to Lina Khan and the FTC. She's tried to take down Microsoft, Meta, Amazon, Google, you name it. She introduced new merger review guidelines that require regulators to review pretty much every deal that makes big companies bigger. That would just waste the limited resources at the regulators, make perfectly legitimate mergers and acquisitions less efficient, and ultimately weaken the economy. Her term ends in 2028, so presumably she'd be there for most of Biden's second term. Luckily, she sucks at her job and has had mostly failures so far, but even the threat of constant litigation and the extra red tape is enough to dampen business in ways that's really hard for most average people to see. The second thing you're more likely to see in a second Biden term is more left-wing social and environmental policies. They're likely to be more extreme if the Democrats control the House and Senate, but they'll be in the same areas either way. More spending on early childhood education, more pro-union policies, which are good for the workers that keep their jobs and get raises, and bad for workers that lose their jobs because it becomes uneconomical to keep the plant open. There will likely be more green investment, more protectionist policies, and more anti-China policies. The next thing that's likely to happen in a second Biden term is higher taxes. It'll be a second term, so he's not going to care as much about winning votes. Biden claims no one earning less than $400,000 will pay higher taxes, but that's a load of crap. If the Democrats control the House and Senate, he'll be able to push through a lot of his prior proposals that failed, like increasing the corporate tax rate, increasing the tax rate on small businesses, and he'll most likely let Trump's 2017 tax cuts expire at the end of 2025. If the House and Senate are mixed, he might not be able to get nearly as much done if his first term has been any indication. House Republicans have blocked nearly every tax increase he's proposed. And that brings us to debt. The number one most likely thing that's likely to happen if Biden gets reelected is a further expansion of the national debt. If the Democrats control the House and Senate, we'll likely have much higher taxes, but he'll also have freedom to spend a lot more. And politicians in both parties have a long history of overly optimistic revenue projections. What scares me even more, though, is a Biden presidency and a Republican House or Senate. It's not all Biden's fault that our debt has increased so much. He proposed more spending and more taxes. Republicans blocked the taxes, so we got a massive fiscal deficit. Who's to say we don't come to a point where the Democrats agree to extend Trump's tax cuts in exchange for the Republicans supporting more of Biden's spending plans? Then our debt would explode like it has for the last 3 years. Government spending policies are like unhealthy food. It's great in the moment, but the long-term consequences of consuming too much can be severe. An economy's reaction is a lot like a body's reaction. You can clearly see the growing problem over the years, but you don't really grasp how bad it is until it's too late. If we don't start making healthier spending decisions, the negative effects will be quick and severe. Trump and Biden both had some wins, but in my opinion, they both deserve a failing grade for their handling of our economy. Neither of them showed much fiscal restraint when they were in office, and I can't see any reason to expect that they would in round 2. I hope I'm wrong. If this is your first time here, I'm Kyle, a former investment advisor to portfolio managers at Merrill Lynch and Morgan Stanley, and I've partnered with former colleagues that are high up in the investment industry to bring Wall Street insights to Main Street investors. If you want to continue this discussion, check out the link below to my free Discord and stay tuned for the next video. Talk to you soon.